welcome to this week's podcast and vodcast. My name's Lindsay and I'm here to talk with my fantastic colleague Ed today. And today's subject is all around viral content, or the potential of viral content in terms of the advantages and disadvantages. So Ed and I have actually been chatting before this recording because we were straight on our soapboxes having a discussion about it, weren't we, Ed?
It's the one thing, I think if I'm asked any question above all others in training, it's how can you create content that goes viral?
Yeah.
And there's definitely good and bad ways of going about it, as we're going to talk about.
And this podcast has come off the back of a post that went viral, potentially to the personal trainer's advantage, or so he may thought, but actually the brand's disadvantage. So if you haven't seen the press, I'm going to let Ed bring this to life for you and just explain very quickly the pretense of what happened, if that's all right, Ed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Pure Gym is a health club with branches across the UK, 294 branches they have, and it would appear that their responsibility of the social media channels for the health clubs is run locally, and I can understand that because ultimately you want to have health clubs need to be part of the community, so no one knows it better than the people that are in the health clubs themselves. And I suspect with some guidance, because looking at the various channels, primarily Instagram, and in some cases Twitter, there is some repeated content and branded content that goes across all of them. But now and again, they decide that the centres themselves decide to add their own elements to it. And of course, when you do that, there's a great risk because not everyone joins social media to be sold to. So if you're going to follow a local gym and all you're going to get is constant talk about promotions and offers, then that might be the reason for someone following it. But I suspect that often it isn't the case. And as you mentioned, a personal trainer from the Luton and Dunstable branch decided to promote their offering, which was a new health program or fitness program, which was entitled 12 Years of Slave. And the words that he used in his post was entitled 12 Years of Slave after the epic movie This Is Our Workout of the Month to celebrate Black History Month. He added, slavery was hard and so is this. Now, as you can imagine, if you're unaware of this story, then I'd be very surprised if you're keeping abreast of social media news, because it absolutely went viral to a way that Pure Gym then, through their own national channels, had to issue a statement distancing themselves from the actions of the personal trainer. The personal trainer had to also took to Instagram to offer his unreserved apology as well. He's still receiving, nasty comments on social media too. And I think it's worth pointing out for part of the discussion that he's also a man of color, and he is I'm not saying that negates his, that somehow that takes an element away from it, but it's part of the narrative, part of the story. And, I'm sure he may have meant it with the best of intentions, but clearly it didn't happen.
Yeah, and I'm sure he probably did. He either went into it naively or just went into it with the best intentions for all the right reasons. And I'm sure he wasn't trying to create the reaction. Well, he wanted the reaction he did, but not in the way he got it, probably. He just wanted more sign-ups, but trying to help people get fit at the same time. And like you've said, anybody that saw it, as soon as you see it, you go, oh, it's a bit cringy. But actually, he did this last year as well, didn't he, Ed? This isn't a new thing.
Absolutely, and no one batted an eyelid. No one remembered an element. I mean, this post will stand out. We'll talk about the Pure Gym post for months, possibly some years into the future in some way or another. It will come up in training sessions, I don't doubt. But you're right, he mentioned it a year ago and there was no uproar. Now, of course, 2020 has taken some dramatic turns that has brought the conversation of race back to the forefront, and that's no bad thing. But it's interesting how society has therefore seen now that it's gone viral in a way that was completely out of the personal trainer or Pure Gym's purview, if you like, or if their ability to contain it. But last year, no, and it was an almost identical post last year as well. And you would assume that if there was a feeling within the organisation that it shouldn't have happened the way it did, then Pure Gym would have made sure that actually don't do that again. That's not that's not how we communicate things. That's not how we engage with our audience. That's not how we represent our brand. So here's the way that we do. Here's our tone of voice. Here is what the purpose of using our channels. This is what we use them for. And so that even though it didn't hit the headlines in quite the same way last year as it did this year, it would have, ensured that it didn't happen again, because obviously if you keep doing it, eventually it will. And 2020 has been a different year for that.
And I think it's always a dilemma with a company that's either got national coverage like this with local centres, or even international. We work with companies from the smallest to the largest. I'm going to sneeze.
Not now you said it.
No, I'm not now. I've probably said it. Edit this bit out. Yeah, we work with some of the smallest companies and the largest ones in the world, and they always have this problem of they either can't control or don't want to control what the local people are doing, and in a way they shouldn't, because like this personal trainer, he knows the people that are coming into his gym, so he wants to communicate stuff that's relevant to them. Where if it's always got the same corporate tone, the same corporate voice, it's just boring and it turns people off, doesn't it? So it's trying to think of how can an organization best utilize social media without going down the, oh, well, my teenage daughter always does this, I'm just going to leave it to her, that extreme, to the totally controlling, you can't send a post out without sign off from this and this and this. What do you think might be the best ways that Pure Gym could have prevented this, or any other company could potentially prevent this? You can't prevent it 100% because it's down to humans interpreting things at the end of the day, isn't it? But in terms of trying to prevent this in the future or going forward, how do you think might be the best ways of doing this, Ed?
I think you're right. I think in different ways across multiple brands, and even for Pure Gym, I don't doubt that this has happened before in some regard. I'm not saying identical to this, but Pure Gym basically had two options. So one of which is that they do run it centrally, that they do get someone in HQ to manage the social media accounts of all 294 branches. And as you've already alluded to, that would have been at great human resource and financial cost, and for little benefits, I would suspect too. Yeah. So the second side is that you ultimately have to therefore allow the branches to do it themselves. And health clubs are, especially if we take 2020 being a year where we've been confined to our homes more, and as we've seen from the likes of Joe Wicks offering alternatives to people to keep fit, to be a part of that conversation, to guide your community so that when gyms are more, people feel more comfortable about using them and they're more freely open, that you're thought about and considered and talked about in positive ways. And I think every community is different. Every community has their own story, and a health club needs to be a part of that. So I think it is right that it was done in branch, but I wonder how much guidelines they have. Now, I've tried to source this and I can't find any location online that Pure Gym have a social media policy, but I suspect they do, because they're a big company with great responsibility and employees, and I would have thought from an HR perspective they would have. But how well has that been kind of engaged with all of their branch managers and staff? How well has that been? How frequently has that been updated? I mean, I've come across even, recently where branches go, yeah, no, or businesses have gone, yeah, no, we've got a social media policy, but the last time it was updated was January 2019 or 2018, and you think, well, social media moves on and people change. So if people are coming and going, how well are they clear as to what the personality of the brand is themselves? So I think, as I say, I'd be surprised if Pure Gym didn't have a social media policy, but I think they need to ensure that everyone knows what their responsibility is on social media, not just how Instagram works, because quite frankly, it's not difficult, and also many people know how to use it, but how does Pure Gym represent itself on social media? What's their personality? What channels are they allowing? What channels are they avoiding? What kind of content works to engage ourselves? What do we deem acceptable and unacceptable? And what are the repercussions if you cross the line of unacceptable content as well? Because it's a carrot, the social media policy, as well as a stick. And ultimately social media is there to get you to engage with your audience in a positive way that does make you more attractive to people who use your health club or people who don't, but it can convince them to do so. So it's definitely a carrot rather than a stick, but I think many people see it as a stick and therefore they distance themselves from it, and then this happens.
Yeah, and I think in terms of policy, absolutely, I see companies and they're like, yeah, we've sent it out, like, yeah, but how do you know they've actually read it? How do you know they actually understand it? Because social media content should educate, inspire and or entertain in a obviously ethical manner. But just sending out a policy and getting someone to sign it doesn't mean they've understood it. So, whether it's workshoppy and or, education or training, some online quick snippets just to make people aware, and also potentially case studies, what worked really well, what didn't, but ensuring that they are showing their personality at the same time, because you've like you've alluded to, during COVID especially, like there's been so many, I've always wanted to get fit online, and Joe Wicks is a prime example of that. And there's people that disagree with his stuff and say, actually, there's personal trainers that go, he shouldn't be doing that. But, he's raised a huge amount of money for the NHS as well. So it's about being aware of the risk and being aware of actually how other people interpret it. And maybe as part of their policy, what they should do is say, okay, well, before you send anything out, get someone else to have a look at it. Because I always say, think about it twice, post it once. So maybe just get someone else's pairs of eyes on it, because just having someone else's perspective is hugely valuable, rather than just your sort of little siloed view of, well, this will make a good post. It worked really, really well last year. Actually, if you look at it in context of the press that's going on around slavery, etc., we're in a whole different, and I agree, like it absolutely should be brought to the forefront, but his best intentions were there, but actually through what's going on outside of his control, it's actually come back to potentially bite him on the bottom.
I mean, there's a common sense issue here. Slavery is hard, and so is this. It's just, a mad thing to write, and no way can this be. And I think there's, social media is very much a confidence thing, and I think arguably people often avoid it because they don't feel so comfortable using it, or they have negative connotations of every time they go onto Facebook, they see pictures of pets and breakfast, or pets eating breakfast, and that's all there is, or there's political division or all that stuff, and that's fine, but because, as you've said, it can do so much in terms of inspiring, informing and entertaining, and it's a real confidence issue in getting to that point, and sometimes you just need to take some pigeon steps to get there. And I think if you're in any doubt as to whether something looks good or not, just get other people to run their eyes over it. And I would be very surprised if the personal trainer at the Luton and Dunstable branch who's related to this or who wrote this, did show it to other people and they went, yeah, no, absolutely fine. I can't see what could go wrong here. So I think, if we can build our confidence just by getting someone who knows what we're trying to get across, and especially when you're using platforms where brevity is so important, context can often be missed when we're writing comments that are that added to the images. And take Instagram as well. People go to a channel because of the images, but they stay for the comments, and those comments can be so powerful when you get them right.
Yeah, and I think, and that's, we've all received emails that we've misunderstood as well, aren't we? They are words, and words can be understood in various different contexts. So it's really important that is crystal clear. So having that other person looking at it before you send it is really useful. And I think on the flip side of that, you've said, a lot of people don't have confidence. And we're working with an organisation at the moment, a big global organisation that, they're very old school. They've got huge credibility, and there might be many people within their organisation that are actually quite nervous about saying anything on social media because they're frightened of being pulled over the coals. So actually that social media policy and that engagement, saying, look, we want you to have your personality, because people buy people. Like, there's no good you or me just coming on here and say social beats say this, it just, there's nothing to it, there's no value to it, is there? So the way you teach and you talk is very different to me, so we have to have our own personalities, but it's managing the balance of personalities, your value, your content, and then the social media policy and the guidelines within that organization as well, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even the branches themselves, when, a branch in Luton and Dunstable isn't going to have the same personality as a branch in central London or a branch in Edinburgh. There are so many different elements to this, and that's before you get to the people. But again, generally, I think as a general rule, when we post things on social media, nothing really devastating is going to happen unless you cross the line, which this one truly crossed. And again, I don't think this is so much of a confidence area as a complete error of judgment. I remember once, so about 3 years ago, around this time, I went to with a friend to Oktoberfest in Munich, and had a few drinks. That's what you do. Got home at the end of the night and sent my wife a text simply saying, "Love you," with a few kisses. Or so I thought, as I woke up the following morning, getting a text from my wife going, "You didn't message me before you went to sleep," and opened Twitter to find a whole bunch of responses because inadvertently I tweeted the words "love you" instead of the text. But, so, and they were all great, people just going, "Had a few too many," or "love you too," and that's fine. And because there's nothing there that can cross. Don't post anything that you wouldn't say to someone else in a room full of your target audience. Absolutely. And ultimately, I might have looked a bit foolish for doing it, but no real harm done. Going back to the post from Luton Dunstable, I just don't see how you would have truly have said that in a room. And there's a line that often says, "Don't post anything on social media that you wouldn't mind appearing on the front page of a newspaper." And I guess it's not a bad line to have. I don't think it's as black as white as that, but ultimately, that's quite a good kind of benchmark to aim for. And I think, again, this doesn't pass that test in any way, shape or form.
Yeah. And if you're not sure about something, like if you really think, I'm not sure about that, then just leave it for a couple of days. Even if you've got even if you don't have someone that can look over it, just park it for a couple of days and think about it, have a look at the press, just be aware of what's going on in the outside world, and then maybe pick it up again. But linked to that will be interesting. And I don't agree with their post whatsoever, by the way, and I know you don't either, but it'll be interesting to see actually if it had the desired effect, like actually if it generated a huge amount of business, because that links us on to actually there's stuff outside of our control in terms of viral content that can happen, isn't there? And I know we were chatting before the podcast around, we both have examples of this, which I wanted to share as well. Do you want to share yours first?
Yeah, I got two actually, which are great ones. But I'm going to share just one that we didn't discuss before, very briefly, which was in Somerset. There was this deli, and someone posted on their Facebook page saying that they really enjoyed the deli, but they didn't have anything to eat because the cakes were uncovered, and they thought staff would be breathing on the kind of air going around. Again, this is a long preceded to the COVID world we're in now, but just as a general kind of feeling around it. But they still stuck around and had coffee, and they gave 3 out of 5 stars. Well, the person who ran the deli hit back with "Don't come back. Your feedback is," I shan't repeat the words in case children are listening, "you would need to be a midget with the neck of a giraffe to breathe over them, you stupid woman." And I thought, what are you doing? And this was on a small deli in a kind of rural county in England, and I found out about this because not only had it escalated within the channels, but it had spilled onto Twitter. And this was on a Friday, and it was extraordinary, some of the fallout from this. And the person who wrote it stood by their misogynistic rant, and actually to the point where this was then printed in the national press, all the big papers on the Monday, and by Wednesday they had to shut down their social media accounts, which they didn't reopen for about a month, with a full unreserved apology. But what do you think happened to that deli as a result of that? As angry as we are, what do you think happened to the footfall of that deli over that weekend?
It was probably pretty busy, would be my guess.
And everyone wanted to see who this Basil Fawlty-esque character was, and that's the issue, isn't it? It's an anthropological issue as much as it is a technical one, because we often see this. If you take the political debate, people would rather to be divisive than apathy, because it gets you talking about them, and it doesn't win you long-term friends. if you want short-term publicity, fine, go out and insult your customers. But if you want long-term relationships, which is ultimately what social media is, then you've got to build them in a more kind of personality focused way. The one that I was going to mention that we spoke about before was in San Antonio in Texas, a mattress company who were promoting their Twin Tower sale, which was in September. I think it was 2018, might have been 2017, and started with 2 towers of mattresses, 2 chaps standing in front of them, and then the woman who ran the shop standing in front of the blokes in camera, gesticulating about the benefits of this sale, threw her arms out broadly, knocked into the 2 fellows who then fell into the mattresses, and those mattresses toppled over. And then she looked into the camera as I bashed the mic while I'm gesticulating too. She looked into the camera and said, "We'll never forget." And she was hauled over the coals across social media for damaging the memory of 9/11. She was across all the TV stations across the southern states of America as well, doing the same thing. I don't need to mention the brand name. If you Google it, you'll easily find it. And it was everyone going, "I can't believe how they were. Terrible name. They're terrible. I can't believe she did this." Oh, they've got a sale on, have they? And I messaged them in the following January to say, "Look, I don't want to have a go at you for this, but I'm generally curious from a social media perspective what impact it had." And they had a record sale. Because again, it's creating this virality that gets people talking about you, because the more people talk about you, some of them are going to like you, and some of them will just see past the rhetoric of hatred and go for actually what was meant to be at the crux of the story. But again, it never wins you long-term friends. All it does is it just solves the problem there and then, but you'll do long-term reputational damage.
Yeah, and people remember it. The gym post, the Pure Gym post, that one you've just mentioned. Like, we'll always remember that for years and years. And it's interesting how people have that nervousness towards social media for that damage. And the example I was going to share is actually an accounting firm. I won't name their name, but it's an accounting firm I trained a number of years ago. They were your traditional accounting firm, very well established, been around for a number of years, very well thought of in the market, but hadn't taken the step into social media. So I had actually spent a day with them a couple of months previously and had gone in to do some social media training, and they hadn't started their social media training. We spent a lot of the day thinking about what their strategy should be, who their target audience was, and how they could communicate their education, their knowledge, and not sell, because too many businesses jump on social media and just sell, which none of us are on social media to be sold to, are they? And the way I left the meeting was, because they couldn't decide between them, whatever you do, please put a social media and policy in place for your employees, because it's super important. Whether you're on social media or not, it doesn't stop your employees being on social media personally. So you need to protect your business and your brand. So a couple of months passes, and I suddenly see on our local press this tweet. And to cut a long story short, one of their members of their team that hadn't been in my training at all, she was a receptionist, had been driving home from work, and she'd either hit a cyclist or knocked a cyclist on her way home from work. She then decided to tweet this in public and say, "Cyclists shouldn't be on the road, they don't pay car tax." Well, the tweet got picked up by press and the said cyclist. And before the accounting firm knew it, because journalists, as they tend to have a nature of, when they find something, they tend to go digging a bit deeper, don't they? So when they scrolled down her tweets, they'd seen that she'd been taking pictures of driving at 70 miles an hour down a country lane. She was doing not just, things outside of social media boundaries, like legal boundaries as well. So she was totally hauled over the coals. And of course, the organization who was not on social media, the first they know about this is reading the headlines on the press that this receptionist from said accountancy firm had done X, Y, and Z. So without them even being on social media, they'd got not just national coverage, this was international coverage across a broad sector of platforms, online and offline. So as soon as I saw this, I did ring my contact and said, "Do you need a hand? Did you get the social media policies in place?" Which they had. So obviously they were able to manage that, but what they couldn't manage was actually it had gone viral outside of their control, and their name was being dragged over the coals for it. So I provided them with support. They had it well handled anyway. But then I met up with the gentleman a couple of months later and said, so what are the thoughts on the board now, whether you should be on social? Because I'm guessing that they might feel even more nervous now. And he said, well, actually, we saw the power of it. So now we're using social media really well and we're really engaging on it. So it was a really fascinating story of they could gone even more into their shell and said, we're not touching it with a barge pole or a didgeridoo, in your case, Ed, with a didgeridoo in your background. Or they could be, no, we're going to embrace it because we can see the power of it. And they decided to take the latter. So very interesting, fascinating story. You couldn't have made it up, but it just highlights of whether an organization isn't using social media or is. It's not just about educating the guys that are actually using social media within your organization. It's actually engaging all of your employees about the power, and not just from a business point of view, their own personal point of view, because even if that receptionist, like, her name is going to be across social media forever with that press, actually, you know, what career damage is that going to have done her as well? So it wasn't just from their protection, it's for your employees' protection as well.
Do you think that any reputational damage long term would be at all, even a small percentage, as far as Pure Gym or as far as the accountancy firm are concerned?
Do you think what, sorry?
Do you think there's any brand reputational damage?
I mean, in terms of Pure Gym, would I not join them because of that post? I mean, it'd leave a bit of a sour taste, but I wouldn't, if they were, you know, if they were local to me and I really like the local person, I would still join them. So I don't think it does in that instance, I don't think it does a huge amount of reputational. I think every example is different. You know, from the accountant's point of view, people could see if they were using, you know, common sense, they could see it wasn't their fault. It was a member of their team. They had no real part of that. Yes, it got them PR coverage, and we always say all PR coverage is good PR coverage. Yeah, did it get them all business? I didn't ask them. But in terms of reputational damage, again, I don't think it would have done them a huge disservice, and the Pure Gym one. So that's obviously just my view, and everyone's different, but I don't think it will have done them a huge amount. But I think there probably are some out there that would have done huge reputational damage. You know, the mattress one did generate a huge amount of sales, but the Americans are very patriotic, and there isn't anybody on this planet that I don't think knows what happened at 9/11. And so that could be a bit of there'll be people that were actually affected by that would probably never purchase from them because they might have lost loved ones, you know, or family and friends. You just don't know, do you? So I'm not sure.
And I think that's it, because I don't think there is any long-term damage, and it's that fine line. So if I did say something that was incredibly divisive or discriminatory on social media, I would, you know, my opinion, rightly so, be properly hold to account for it. But I'm also fairly confident that people will look at the companies I represent and work for, and Social B would have been contacted and made aware of my post. Because it doesn't take a hard to Google it, look up on LinkedIn or whatever to find out who that is, and there'll be an element of you have to do something that will either minimize that reputational risk or, you know, at least make your feelings known about it as well. And but there is an element where actually if I did that, I don't think there would only be long-term damage done. As I agree with you, I don't think there is for Pure Gym and the accountancy firm. You, on the other hand, if you did it, then I think there's a big reputational challenge for Social B to put it, because obviously if it happens at the top, you question how that's filtered down through everyone else. But I think the point that Pure Gym needed to understand here too is that even if this was done under the personal trainer's personal account, as opposed to through the Luton and Dunstable account, is that, again, it wouldn't have been hard to find out who he works with, and they still would have got into social media trouble, if you like, for it. But again, that's where it needs to be addressed. It's even if we do it under our private Facebook accounts, where, you know, privacy settings are there that only friends and family see. Again, you know, you're not, in fact, it doesn't mean that you can then suddenly go on there and say what you like without fear of there being a comeback to you. So I think the lesson from that is, if you're discriminatory in any way, shape or form, stay off social media.
Yeah, it'll keep your opinions to yourself, just think them and do nothing with them, because that last is a really valid one. Like, people can take screen grabs, and they do all the time. I've done, and you've done as well, like lots of customer service training in social media. And we all know, if you work in a business, you can people can post stuff on your Facebook page or post comments, and you can hide them. They can still see them, but you can hide them. But if people are really angry about something, and I think this was I won't name the name, but there was an estate agency in London that was, blowing their trumpets about how amazing they are. I don't know if they're amazing or not, so I'm not here to comment on that. But there'd been a few instances where there'd been some really bad customer service, or they'd been spamming people or something, and someone had posted on their page a comment about this, and basically they hid it because they didn't want to upset the person, but they didn't want anyone else to see it. But of course, if someone's really angry, so say that was you and me, you may have posted it, you know that, so you might go, Lindsay, can you log in and see if you can see it? And if you can't, and then obviously it fuels the fire. So if you're dealing with humans, as we all do all day, every day, you need to be aware of what you're saying. And like that deli, like, we can be really mad, but ultimately customers are always right. So we might not agree with them, but we need to think about how we can deal with that, how we can convey it in a compassionate, ethical manner, empathetic manner. And if we have done something wrong, then put our hands up and say, sorry, it's no good trying to hide the fact. Or, like this estate agent who's just deleting all the comments and just hiding it, like that's just going to fuel the fire. But if you can be empathetic about it, say sorry, which nearly all the organisations we've seen here have done, it does really help that people realise you can't be right all of the time. We're all going to make mistakes occasionally, but it's the context and the empathy towards it that can really help towards it, I think.
The power of a chamomile tea, just to sit back before you respond. And I think that's because everyone's entitled to an opinion, whether it's right or not, and you can tell the difference between a constructive feedback and a troll-like feedback, or feedback where someone's just trying to get a discount of you, which unfortunately does happen, is quite commonplace. But again, we can all tell the difference between those, and everyone is, and no one's perfect. And like we do with feedback forms after training, I want to know where there's areas of improvement that could have made it even better. And the same we do with as we should be doing with any business. So when someone does leave feedback on social media, as the woman from the deli said, look, she stuck around and had coffee. So she didn't hate the place. She was just challenging about how the cakes were uncovered. And again, it may be that she was completely wrong. We've done tests, we've spoken to the health and safety executive, it's all fine, but she was absolutely entitled to her opinion on that. And I think is just that taking stock and taking that chamomile tea and calm down and going back a few minutes later and just accepting that they're entitled to that opinion and thank them for it. Because also the other side of it is that when people do leave negative feedback, and again it's constructive, the power of going back with a personality-driven human response can turn not just that one individual person into a marketing opportunity. If we can turn that person around from how they originally felt about us to a positive feeling about us, then it will affect how that person talks about us to their peers and their friends and family, etc. But equally as well, anyone watching the conversation will feel the same way too. And if we just try and remove a comment, if we just try and pretend things didn't happen, then we're just digging a bigger hole for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Because social media is fueled by humans, and social media, it's a
human tool, not a data tool.
Absolutely. It's a human tool, and as humans we have an inbuilt instinct to share our views, like you say, whether you agree or you don't agree with them. That's entirely up to the people listening or watching. But if you delete people's views, then they think, well, I've got a right to say something. But like you've said, even if it's negative stuff, I always say, whether it's positive or negative, it's always a gift. Because if people give you negative feedback, or if they give you constructive feedback of how things improve, you can change it. If you don't get that, then you think things are all rosy, which no business is perfect. There's always room for improvement. So it's just thinking about how you can use that. And if someone has really wound you up, or if you really don't agree with somebody, ranting back in text is just not going to help the situation, or deleting it, then they're not going to feel like that their voice has been heard. So there's a lot I think people can learn from the discussions today and the experiences and the case studies we've shared. But I think social media doesn't sit just in marketing or sales. It sits across every touch point within the organization, doesn't it? From their personal point of view and a business and brand point of view, and really getting people built into the importance of a social media policy, and not just sending it to them for signing, actually walking them through it, doing some training, some engagement around HR and recruitment as well. It's such a powerful tool, and it shouldn't be this, oh yeah, we should post that on social media, or yeah, that'll be fine. Because as we've seen today, it can go from no coverage last year that Pure Gym got to global PR coverage that they probably didn't quite want. had they really engaged on the social media policy side of things. Anything else you want to add, Ed, to what we've seen?
No, I think the point that you added there is the thing that if there is a lesson from this, that's it. It's that it's a carrot, not a stick. And if you need support communicating or engaging your teams with that, then get in touch. But it's a fantastic opportunity that that companies can have when they're all kind of working together across all departments and teams.
Yeah, and I think even from the accounting example, they were very nervous about it. Actually, they saw the power through, unfortunately, an unfortunate thing that happened to them has actually totally changed their mind. But I think it's absolutely for the protection of their team and your organisation as a whole. And if you're not sure, there's no rush. Wait. You don't have to think there's always this deadline of, we're supposed to be posting on social media today. Or just because you've always done it, people are not going to be waiting going, they always send a tweet at 9 o'clock. If you're not sure, then just wait for a couple of hours, get someone else to have a look at it, park it, go and do something else, come back and go, maybe that isn't great. So,
and that's often been the case, as this personal trainer should have done. I think it's safe to say. Yes. Well,
we'll see if he posts it next year, shall we? Same time next year, if he decides to post it or something else maybe. But
I hope he hasn't lost his job. I hope he's been educated as to how, how to move forward. And I think that'll be a more valuable lesson for anyone watching it too.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that, maybe they've identified some more training or more engagement they need to be doing, or working as a community across the 200 odd, organizations. Maybe they could set up a little private group where they can interact with each other and share ideas and best practices, because I don't think he meant any harm by it, but he just said the wrong things at the wrong time on the wrong channel, got misinterpreted, and hey ho, he's on the front cover of a lot of newspapers and social media.
I did tweet them if they wanted any training. I haven't heard back.
Excellent. Well, so thank you so much for engaging in conversation today, Ed. As always, it's been fantastic. But next time, I think we should definitely involve the didgeridoo and the guitar in our discussions, and definitely think I want to see that in action being played as part of the next podcast or video that we have, if that's okay. We love a challenge, me in particular.
Yeah, all right. I better go practice then.
Cool. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks for having me.